A millionaire arrives unannounced at lunchtime and can't believe his eyes when he sees the triplet boys, aged 7, of the housekeeper having lunch at his table. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sound of the automatic gate echoing through the garden of the mansion in downtown should have been a sufficient warning, but Maria was too focused on balancing the tray of orange juice to notice. Her 3 kids, John, Peter and Michael, were seated around the immense 100-year-old mahogany dining table, attacking plates of pasta with marinara sauce as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The laughter of the 7-year-old triplets filled the normally quiet environment, while Peter tried to teach his brothers how to make mustaches with the spaghetti. "Look, Mom, I'm an old man," shouted Peter, hanging 2 strands of pasta over his upper lip. Maria involuntarily smiled at the kitchen door, watching her boys for the first time relaxed in that imposing house. For 3 years working there, she had kept her kids practically invisible, a necessary shadow to preserve her job. Mrs. Johnson, the former housekeeper who preceded her, had always warned, "Mr. Johnson doesn't like noise, let alone kids. If he finds out you have children, he'll fire you on the spot." The 2-story mansion, with its 5,000 square feet of built area, had always seemed like a mausoleum to Maria. Travertine marble on the floor, imported baccarat crystal chandeliers from France, designer furniture that cost more than a popular car. Everything immaculate, everything cold, everything exactly as Mr. Johnson liked it. The ivory-colored walls displayed expensive abstract paintings that she had never dared to touch, even to clean them, delegating that task to a specialized company that came once a month. "John, don't put your foot on the chair," she whispered, still holding the tray and watching her quietest son, who had discovered he could reach the plate better by resting his knee on the beige upholstery of the Victorian chair. John completely ignored her, focused on twirling the spaghetti around his fork with the seriousness of a little adult. At 7, he was the most introspective of the 3, the one who preferred books to playtime, who asked difficult questions about why they couldn't play in the big living room or why they always had to stay in the back room when the boss was home. Michael, the youngest by 15 minutes, was trying to build a tower with the pieces of tomato from the sauce, his tongue sticking out in total concentration. He was the artist of the family, always drawing on any paper he could find, creating fantastic worlds with worn-out colored pencils. Peter, the most outgoing, continued to make funny faces to entertain his brothers. It was at that moment that Maria heard the keys in the lock of the front door. Her blood ran cold. Mr. Johnson was supposed to be in Washington, D.C. until Thursday. It was only Tuesday, 2:30 in the afternoon. The trip was to finalize a $1 million contract for a commercial complex in downtown, something he had been planning for months. What the hell was he doing back? The footsteps echoed through the entrance hall, that characteristic sound of leather shoes on marble. Maria knew that sound well. It always announced when she should disappear with her cleaning supplies, becoming an almost ghostly presence in the hallways. "Boys, you have to," she began to whisper desperately, but it was too late. Ricardo Johnson, 42 years old, 6 feet tall, appeared in the doorway of the dining room like a storm about to break. His navy blue Armani suit was impeccable even after the trip, the Gucci tie perfectly aligned, his dark hair with grey streaks at the temples slicked back with imported gel. Everything about him screamed control, precision, power. His dark brown eyes, usually cold and calculating, widened as he contemplated the scene before him. 3 identical boys, with messy brown hair and soccer team t-shirts, had turned his dining room into a culinary war zone. Crumbs scattered across the marble floor, splatters of marinara sauce decorating the antique table, crumpled linen napkins like flags of surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. Peter, who was in the middle of a laugh, choked on the pasta. John dropped his fork onto the plate with a metallic clatter that echoed through the room. Michael, the little artist, kept stacking tomatoes as if nothing had happened. "What exactly is happening here?" Mr. Johnson's voice came out low, controlled, but with a dangerous vibration that Maria knew well. It was the tone he used when an employee made a serious mistake, when a supplier delayed an important delivery, when someone dared to challenge his authority. Maria stepped forward, the tray trembling in her hands. At 34, she had faced many battles: the difficult pregnancy of the triplets, the abandonment of her ex-husband when he found out they were 3 babies, the struggle to find work with 3 small kids. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Mr. Johnson, they are my kids. I didn't expect you to come back today and—" "Your kids?" He repeated the word as if it were an alien concept. "You've been working in this house for 3 years and never mentioned having kids. It's just that I knew you wouldn't want kids here, and I really need this job, sir. They usually stay at school and then with the neighbor. But today she had to take her mother to the doctor, and school let out early because of the parent-teacher meeting, and Mom, who is this man?" Peter interrupted, his childlike voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Mr. Johnson looked at the boy, truly seeing him for the first time. Peter stared back at him fearlessly, curious, with marinara sauce at the corner of his mouth and a strand of spaghetti dangling, pasta still hanging from his chin. There was something in the frankness of that gaze that unsettled the businessman for a moment. "This is Mr. Johnson," Maria murmured, "the owner of the house." "Oh," Peter smiled, revealing a loose tooth. "Hi, Doctor. Your house is very big. It has more rooms than a school." John, always the observer, studied Mr. Johnson with the intensity of a small scientist. "You are very tall," he commented, tilting his head to the side. "And why do you wear a tie inside the house? Isn't it uncomfortable?" Michael, oblivious to the tension, had managed to build a respectable tower with the pieces of tomato and was now trying to place an olive on top, like a cherry on a cake. Mr. Johnson felt something strange happen in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in so long that he almost didn't recognize it. They were real children, not the well-behaved little machines he vaguely imagined when thinking of childhood. They made a mess, asked inconvenient questions, laughed loudly, and existed without asking for permission. "Doctor, I will take them out of here right now," Maria said quickly, placing the tray on the sideboard and rushing toward the kids. "Boys, come on, let's go to the back room. Now!" "But, Mom, I'm not done eating," protested Michael, protecting his tower of tomatoes with his arms. "And I wanted to get to know the doctor better," added Peter. "He seems important." "You will eat in the kitchen as always," Maria whispered, trying to lift Michael from the chair. "Always?" Mr. Johnson asked, his voice strangely soft. Maria froze. I mean, do they always eat in the kitchen? It's just that you are never home at lunchtime, so I thought today." Mr. Johnson looked again at the scene. 3 7-year-old boys, obviously well-mannered despite the mess, sitting at his table as if they belonged there. The table he only used for formal business meetings, which remained empty most of the time, polished and useless like a museum piece. "How old are they?" 7 years old, Doctor. They are triplets." "Triplets," he repeated the word, processing the information. "And where is their father?" Maria's face closed off. "We haven't had contact with him for almost 2 years, Doctor." Mr. Johnson nodded slowly. For 3 years, this woman had cleaned his house, prepared his meals, organized his life, and he never knew she was raising 3 children alone. He never asked, never cared, never saw beyond the function she performed. "Doctor," John suddenly said, "why doesn't your house have toys?" The question caught Mr. Johnson off guard. "What do you mean? It's very big, but it doesn't have toys. No video games, no history books, nothing fun. It's a sad house." "John!" Maria reprimanded, horrified. But Mr. Johnson was looking at the boy with a strange expression. A sad house? Yes, John continued, ignoring his mother's desperate glances. It looks like a museum. Beautiful, but where no one can touch anything. My mother always says not to touch anything because everything is very expensive and important. And do you think things should be touched? Of course. What's the use of a table if no one can eat on it? What's the use of a house if no one can play in it? Mr. Johnson was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less controlled. Finish eating? Maria blinked, confused. How, Doctor? I said for them to finish eating. I don't like food waste. And with that, Mr. Johnson turned and left the dining room, leaving behind the hesitant sound of 3 boys returning to their plates and a housekeeper trying to understand what had just happened. Outside, Mr. Johnson leaned against the hallway wall, facing an antique Venetian mirror that reflected his tense face. In 42 years of life, he had built an empire, accumulated wealth, earned respect in the business world. But never, not for a second, had his house felt like a home. Until today. The following 2 weeks after the pasta incident, as Mr. Johnson had begun to mentally refer to the episode, brought a series of adjustments that left the entire house in a state of constant alert. The morning after the incident, he had summoned Maria to his office, an intimidating environment with mahogany shelves filled with business codes and framed diplomas, where the scent of leather from the furniture mingled with the subtle fragrance of his French cologne. "Sit down," he had said, indicating the leather chair in front of his desk. Maria remained standing, nervously wringing her hands. "Doctor, I want to apologize for what happened yesterday. It won't happen again, I promise. The children will stay in the back room whenever you are home." Mr. Johnson studied her for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the desk, a habit he had developed during tense negotiations. "How long have you been supporting these children alone?" The question caught her off guard. Since they were born, practically. Their father left when he found out there were 3. "And you never thought to tell me about them because I needed this job, Doctor." Maria lifted her chin, a spark of dignity shining in her brown eyes. "I've worked as a housekeeper since I was 15. I've been let go twice for having children. Employers say that kids are a distraction, that we can't focus on the job, that we keep asking for time off to go to school meetings." "And do you?" "No, sir. I keep everything organized. I go to meetings on my days off, on weekends. I take them to the doctor in the early morning when needed. I never let the housework suffer." Mr. Johnson nodded slowly. For 3 years, Maria's performance had been impeccable. The house was always organized, meals prepared on time, laundry done with military precision. He had never questioned how. She managed to be so efficient. "How many rooms does this house have, Maria?" 8 rooms, Doctor, including the back room where I stay with the boys." 8 rooms for 1 person, he repeated, as if realizing this for the first time. "And you 4 share a small room." "It's enough for us, Doctor. I'm not complaining." "I wasn't asking if you were complaining." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I was stating a fact." That afternoon, Mr. Johnson had implemented a series of house rules that left the entire home walking on eggshells. The children could roam the house between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, as long as he was in meetings or at the office. Lunchtime would be at 12:30 sharp in the kitchen. Baths only in the service bathroom. Quiet play, no shouting or running around. Maria had accepted everything with excessive gratitude, promising that the boys would be invisible like little ghosts. But ghosts, Mr. Johnson quickly discovered, have a disturbing tendency to appear at the most unexpected moments. On the first morning of official coexistence, he came down for coffee and found Michael sitting on the kitchen floor, drawing something on a sheet of brown paper. The boy had woken up before the others and left the room quietly, drawn by the morning sun streaming through the kitchen window. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Johnson asked, surprised to find the child on the cold marble floor, wearing only a thin cotton pajama. Michael looked up without a trace of guilt or fear. "Drawing your house. It looks very pretty with the morning sun." Mr. Johnson approached, curious despite himself. The drawing was surprisingly detailed for a 7-year-old. It showed the facade of the mansion with impressive accuracy, including the Greek columns, the symmetrical gardens, and even the correct proportions of the windows. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" "I don't know. I've always known." Michael added some shadows with his pencil. "My mother says I was drawing before I could speak properly." "And what else do you draw?" "Everything. Houses, buildings, bridges. I like to imagine how people live inside the places I draw." Mr. Johnson sat in the nearest chair, watching the boy work. "And how do you think people live in my house?" Michael stopped drawing and looked at him with that disarming frankness of children. "You live alone, right? It must be strange. Big houses echo when there aren't enough people in them." Before Mr. Johnson could respond, Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her robe, her hair loose in natural waves that made her look younger than her 34 years. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Her gaze flew to Mr. Johnson. "Doctor, I'm sorry, he left the room without me seeing." "It's fine," Mr. Johnson said, surprising himself. "He was just drawing." Maria quickly approached, seeing the drawing, even worried she couldn't hide a proud smile. "He has been drawing since he was little. He always asks for paper and pencils." "It's good," Mr. Johnson commented. "Very good for his age." Michael beamed with joy at the compliment. "Do you want to see more drawings? I have many in my room." "Michael, don't bother the doctor," Maria said quickly. "Come on, let's have coffee and leave the doctor in peace." But Mr. Johnson was studying the drawing again. "Maria, you said he has always liked to draw. Have you thought about putting him in an art class?" "Classes cost money, doctor, and he has fun just like this. What if the company sponsored some classes for him?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Maria looked at him with a mix of hope and distrust. "Why would you do that?" The question caught him off guard. Why would he? He didn't even know. "Talent shouldn't be wasted," he finally said. In the following days, similar situations became routine. Peter would appear in the library during his allowed hours, fascinated by the architecture and engineering books that filled 2 entire shelves. Contrary to what Mr. Johnson expected, the boy didn't mess up the expensive volumes. On the contrary, he handled them with reverent care, spending hours studying photographs of famous buildings. "Why are all the buildings different?" Peter asked one Thursday afternoon, finding Mr. Johnson organizing documents at the library table. "What do you mean?" "Look here." Peter showed a page with photographs of the Guggenheim Museum. "This one looks like a giant seashell, and this other one," he flipped a few pages, "looks like a glass box. Why don't they make them all the same?" Mr. Johnson stopped what he was doing. It was a question none of his partners had asked in years of meetings about real estate projects. "Because each architect wants to tell a different story," he explained, sitting in the leather armchair next to the boy. "Each building has a personality. And what story does your house tell?" Once again, Mr. Johnson found himself without an immediate answer. What story did his mansion tell? Control? Success? Loneliness? "I don't know," he admitted. "What story do you think it tells?" Peter studied the surroundings, with its tall shelves, coffered ceiling and Persian rugs over the dark wooden floor. "I think it tells the story of someone who wants people to think he is very important and very serious, but maybe he isn't like that inside." The observation hit Mr. Johnson like a punch to the stomach. And what do you think the person is like inside? Maybe he's just someone who hasn't learned to play properly. John, the most introspective of the three, presented his own challenges. Mr. Johnson often found him reading in the most unexpected corners of the house, under the main staircase, on the back porch bench, once even sitting on the floor of the master closet, surrounded by books he had borrowed from the library. "Why don't you read in your room?" Mr. Johnson asked one Saturday afternoon, finding the boy settled in the entrance hall with a basic math book. "Because the light is better here, and it's quieter." "Quieter than your room?" Peter and Michael make noise. Peter keeps trying to draw like Michael, and Michael keeps trying to read like me. Sometimes I just want quiet. Mr. Johnson understood perfectly. He had always valued quiet, the space to think without interruptions. "And what are you reading?" "A book about prime numbers. I got it from the school library." John showed the page, covered in pencil. "Notes. I was trying to understand why some numbers are special and others are not." "And did you come to any conclusion?" "I think all numbers are special, but in different ways, like people." It was unsettling how those boys made Mr. Johnson question things he had always taken for granted. For 3 years, Maria had been just the housekeeper, efficient, discreet, practically invisible. Now, watching her interact with the children, he saw a completely different woman. She was patient when Peter spilled juice on the floor for the 3rd time that day. She was creative in turning a simple dinner into a culinary adventure for Michael. She was wise in explaining complex concepts to John with analogies that a 7-year-old could understand. "How do you manage?" Mr. Johnson asked one afternoon after observing Maria mediate a discussion among the triplets about who deserved the last slice of cake. "Manage what, Doctor?" "Being a mother, raising 3 kids on your own, working full-time and still having the patience to deal with all these situations." Maria smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "There's no secret, Doctor. It's love, really. When you truly love someone, you find the strength to do what needs to be done. And what if you don't have that experience, that instinct? Everyone has it, Doctor. Some just never had the chance to discover it." That night, alone in his master suite overlooking the illuminated garden, Mr. Johnson found himself thinking about her words. In 42 years of life, he had only taken care of himself and his business. There had been relationships, the ex-wife, a few casual girlfriends, colleagues, but they all operated within clear parameters, with defined expectations and well-established boundaries. The children did not respect parameters. They asked inconvenient questions, showed affection without asking for permission, occupied spaces with a naturalness that defied all the unwritten rules of the house. And for the first time in decades, Mr. Johnson began to wonder if his rules made sense. The first morning of March brought a light rain that turned Washington, D.C. into a grey watercolor, and Mr. Johnson woke to a sound he couldn't identify. It wasn't the usual noise of traffic from Augusta Street or the hum of the central air conditioning. It was something subtler, more organic. He checked the clock, 5:40 in the morning. He put on his Italian silk robe and quietly descended the marble stairs. The sound was coming from the living room. Mr. Johnson stopped at the entrance, observing a scene that left him completely perplexed. John was curled up in the burgundy leather armchair, the one Mr. Johnson considered his personal throne, wrapped in the wool blanket that usually lay folded on the back. The boy was holding a book, Fundamentals of Structural Engineering, and his lips moved in almost inaudible whispers. "John?" Mr. Johnson called softly. The boy jumped, nearly dropping the book. "Doctor, Sorry, I didn't mean to—" "What? Are you doing up so early?" John looked down, embarrassed. "I couldn't sleep. Since Dad left, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think about bad things. So I come to read because books make my head quiet." Mr. Johnson felt something strange stir in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in so long that he almost didn't recognize it. Compassion. "And why did you choose that armchair?" "Because it's the most comfortable, and because it smells like you." "Smells like me?" "Yeah, that cologne you wear. It makes me feel safe." The impact of those words hit Mr. Johnson like a bolt of lightning. For 3 years, he had been a distant presence to these children, the owner of the house, the boss of their mother, an authority figure to be avoided. But to John, for some incomprehensible reason, he represented safety. "What were you reading?" John showed the book, embarrassed. "I know it's too difficult for me, but I like looking at the pictures of buildings, and I understand some words." Mr. Johnson approached and sat on the arm of the chair, something he would never do under normal circumstances. "Do you want me to explain some things?" John's eyes lit up. "Really?" For the next hour, while the rain drummed on the French windows of the library, Mr. Johnson found himself explaining basic engineering concepts to a 7-year-old. To his surprise, John not only grasped the simple principles, but also asked questions that demonstrated impressive logical reasoning. "So that's why tall buildings have those iron beams?" John asked, studying a structural diagram. "Exactly. They're like the skeleton of the building. Without them, the weight of the walls and floors would make everything collapse." "Like the bones in our body?" "That's right. Very well observed." John smiled, a smile so genuine and radiant that made Mr. Johnson realize how much he had missed spontaneous reactions in his adult life. Everyone around him, employees, partners, even his ex-wife, always measured their responses, calculated their words, performed for him in some way. "Doctor," John suddenly said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why don't you have kids? You would be a cool dad." The question hit Mr. Johnson hard. "How do you know I don't have kids?" "Because there are no toys in the house, no pictures of children. And my mother said you've lived alone for a long time." Mr. Johnson fell silent for a moment, processing how to respond to a question he didn't even know how to answer completely. Sometimes things just don't happen. "But did you want to?" Mr. Johnson paused. Did he want to? He had spent so many years focused on his career, on building the business empire, that he had never allowed himself to seriously consider fatherhood. "I never thought much about it." "Is it because you had a sad childhood?" The question came out of nowhere but hit the mark. "Why do you think that?" John studied him with those serious eyes, too old for his childlike face. "Because you don't know how to play, and because you're always working, as if you're afraid to stop and think." The precision of the observation left Mr. Johnson speechless. At 7 years old, John had managed to read his personality in a way that expensive behavioral analysts had failed to do in hours of sessions. "Maybe you're right," Mr. Johnson finally admitted. "Do you want me to teach you how to play? Peter is really good at it, but I also know some fun games." Before Mr. Johnson could respond, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Maria appeared at the door, still in her nightgown and robe, her hair loose, framing a worried face. "John! My God, I thought you had left the house. Doctor, I'm sorry. He has this habit of—" "It's no problem," Mr. Johnson interrupted. "We were just talking about architecture." Maria looked back and forth between her son and her employer, trying to decipher the dynamics of the situation. "John, you can't bother the doctor this early." "He wasn't bothering me," Mr. Johnson said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "In fact, it was a very enlightening conversation." John smiled at his mother. "Mom, the doctor knows everything about how buildings stand up. He's really smart." Maria relaxed slightly, but still seemed confused by the situation. "Doctor, if he keeps bothering you at night—" "Maria," Mr. Johnson said, standing up from the armchair, "how many times a week does John wake up like this?" "A few times. Since his father left, he gets anxious. The clinic doctor said it's normal for kids going through sudden changes." "And you? How do you cope with it alone?" The question caught Maria off guard. "I do what I can. I give him calming tea, tell stories, let him read until he gets sleepy again." "That must be exhausting." "It's part of being a mother, Doctor." Mr. Johnson nodded, but something had changed in his expression. "John, how about we make a deal?" "What kind of deal?" "When you can't sleep, you can come to the library. But," he raised a finger, "you have to bring a blanket from your room and can stay until 6:30. After that, you go back to get ready for school. Deal?" John blinked. Incredulous. "Can I really?" "You can. And on weekends, if you want, I can explain more about architecture and engineering." "Doctor," Maria began, visibly emotional. "It's a fair deal," Mr. Johnson said quickly, not wanting to get into discussions about gratitude. "John is curious about the subject, and I have knowledge. It's a mutually beneficial exchange." But as he said this, Mr. Johnson knew it wasn't just an intellectual exchange. There was something in the presence of that serious and reflective child that filled a void he hadn't even known existed. 3 days later, it was Peter's turn to create. An incident. Mr. Johnson came home from work at 7 in the evening and found the boy in the backyard, trying to build something with dry branches and stones. The construction looked like a child's version of a suspension bridge, with strings tying the makeshift structures together. "What are you doing?" Mr. Johnson asked, loosening his tie as he approached. "I'm building a bridge for the ants. Look." Peter pointed to a trail of ants crossing the petunia bed. "They keep going around and around to get over the stones. I thought if I made a bridge, they could go straight." Mr. Johnson observed the rudimentary contraption. It was crude, obviously, but it demonstrated a basic understanding of engineering that impressed him. "And how do you know they will use the bridge?" "I don't know, but if I were an ant, I'd want the easiest path." "Impeccable logic," Mr. Johnson murmured, surprised at himself for taking the conversation seriously. "But your bridge might not be strong enough to support the weight of the ants." Peter looked at him skeptically. "Ants don't weigh anything." "Ah, but when you build any structure, you need to consider not only the weight of what will pass over it, but also factors like wind, rain, vibration. Vibration. When many ants pass at the same time, the movement can make the bridge sway." Peter considered this seriously. "So how do I make a better bridge?" Mr. Johnson looked around the garden, searching for materials. "How about we try with some thicker sticks, and we can use wire instead of string?" What started as a quick explanation turned into a 40-minute construction session. Mr. Johnson found himself kneeling in the damp earth, dirtying his $3,000 suit while helping a 7-year-old boy build a bridge for ants. And, to his complete surprise, he was having fun. "Done," Peter announced when they finished. "Now we just have to wait and see if they will use it." They crouched side by side, watching the trail of ants approach the new structure. The first ant hesitated at the entrance of the makeshift bridge, its antennas moving in cautious investigation. "Come on, little ant," Peter whispered. "Trust us." The ant took a few experimental steps onto the bridge and, apparently satisfied with its stability, continued forward. Soon others began to follow the same path. "It worked!" Peter shouted, jumping for joy. "Our bridge worked! Doctor, we are real engineers now." Mr. Johnson smiled, a genuine smile that surprised them both. "I think so. Can we build other things together? Maybe something bigger, like a tree house?" "Peter," Mr. Johnson began, his rational mind trying to set limits, but he stopped. "Why not? Why not build a tree house? When was the last time he did something just for the pleasure of doing it? "We can talk about it," he finally said. That night, Mr. Johnson found himself in the library again, but this time he wasn't alone. John was in his usual armchair reading a book on basic math, while Michael was drawing on the Persian rug, using colored pencils that Maria had bought with her savings. "Michael," Mr. Johnson said, watching the drawing take shape, "Do you see what you are doing?" Michael proudly lifted the paper. It was a drawing of an ant bridge, but viewed from an aerial perspective that showed not only the structure, but the entire garden around it, with astonishing details of the plants and layout of the space. "How do you manage to draw like this, as if you were flying over the garden?" "I imagine what it would be like if I were a little bird looking down, and then I draw what the bird would see. That's called aerial perspective," Mr. Johnson explained. "It's a technique that architects use to plan spaces." "So I draw like an architect?" "In a sense, yes." Michael beamed with happiness. "When I grow up, I want to be an architect like you." "I'm not an architect, Michael. I'm a real estate businessman." "What's the difference?" The question made him pause. What was the real difference? When was the last time he had actively engaged in the creative process of a project, rather than just analyzing numbers and profit projections? "Architects create," he finally said. "Businessmen manage." "But you must have created something, right? Otherwise, how would you know so much about bridges and buildings?" Michael was right. Mr. Johnson had studied architecture before transitioning to business administration. He had dreamed of creating buildings that would change the urban landscape, that would tell stories through their forms and structures. When had he stopped dreaming? "Doctor," John suddenly said, closing his book, "can I ask a personal question?" "Sure." "Were you ever a kid like us?" Mr. Johnson laughed, low and genuine laugh. "Of course, every adult was a kid once. But do you remember what it was like, playing and being happy with little things?" The question echoed in the silent library. Mr. Johnson realized that no, he did not remember. His childhood had been a succession of high expectations, strict discipline, constant preparation for a future of responsibilities. When was the last time he felt the pure joy that Peter demonstrated with the ant bridge? "Not much," he admitted. "Maybe you can help me remember." And for the first time in decades, Mr. Johnson allowed himself to consider that perhaps, just perhaps, his priorities needed a complete overhaul. The phone rang at 7:15 on a rainy Tuesday morning, interrupting the quiet coffee ritual that had become a morning routine for Mr. Johnson. Maria was in the kitchen, preparing the boys' lunch for school, while the triplets finished getting ready in the back room. The name on the caller ID made Mr. Johnson frown. Robert Montero, his older brother. "Good morning, Robert." "Mr. Johnson, we need to talk. Urgent." His brother's voice sounded tense, laden with that authoritative tone he always used when he wanted to establish his position as the eldest in the family hierarchy. "About what?" "Not over the phone. I'll be there in an hour." The call ended before Mr. Johnson could protest. He knew Robert well enough to understand that an unannounced visit meant trouble. At 45, 3 years older than Mr. Johnson, Robert had always resented the fact that his younger brother had taken over the presidency of the company after their father's death. Officially, he was the executive vice president and controlled 30% of Montero Construction's shares. Unofficially, he was constantly conspiring to increase his influence. "Is there a problem, Doctor?" Maria asked, noticing Mr. Johnson's somber expression. "My brother is coming over. When he arrives, please keep the boys in their room." Maria nodded, but Mr. Johnson noticed the worry in her eyes. In recent weeks, the dynamics of the home had changed so much that the presence of the children had become almost natural. They roamed the mansion during certain hours. John continued his morning meetings in the library. And Mr. Johnson had even allowed Michael to turn a corner of the porch into his studio, where he drew in the afternoons. Robert arrived punctually an hour later, driving his black BMW as if racing to put out a fire. Tall and thin like Mr. Johnson, but with a more ostentatious elegance. Tailored suits from England, Italian shoes that cost more than a minimum wage, a Patek Philippe watch he had inherited from their father. His completely grey hair was slicked back with gel, and his steel blue eyes always seemed to be calculating some advantage. "What change is this in the house?" were his first words upon entering the hall, observing a drawing by Michael that Maria had taped to the kitchen fridge, and that was partially visible from the entrance. "What change? Don't play dumb with me, Mr. Johnson. Information reaches me, employees talk, neighbors gossip. Are you living with kids now?" "I'm allowing my housekeeper to keep her children here during work hours." "And since when do you care about the well-being of domestic employees?" Robert headed for the office without waiting for an invitation, a tactic he always used to establish control over conversations. Mr. Johnson followed him, closing the door behind him. "Let's get straight to the point," Robert said, sitting in the chair in front of the desk without being invited. "Minority shareholders are concerned. Some important clients have commented on changes in your behavior." "What kind of comments?" "The Villa Maddalena project, for example. Deciding to include social housing in a luxury development. Reducing profit margins by 20% to create community spaces." "That's not you, Mr. Johnson." Mr. Johnson leaned back in his chair, studying his brother. "And who am I, Robert?" "You are a brilliant businessman, calculating, focused on results. You always have been. Since you took over the company, our profits have tripled. Now all of a sudden, you're making emotional decisions." "Emotional?" "Humanitarian, philanthropic, call it what you want. The point is, this is not sustainable in a business like ours." Mr. Johnson drummed his fingers on the desk, a habit that always irritated Robert. "And what if I told you that these emotional decisions could generate more profits in the long run? Social responsibility is on the rise, Robert. International investors value companies with social consciousness." "Maybe, but it's not the impression you're giving off. It seems like you're losing focus." "According to whom?" Mr. Johnson leaned forward, lowering his voice confidentially. "Michael, you're 42 years old. You're single, childless, living alone in an 8-bedroom mansion. It's natural to start questioning your life choices, but you can't let an existential crisis affect the company." The words hit Mr. Johnson like a slap. Existential crisis? It's obvious. And now these children have appeared in your life and you're projecting some kind of paternal fantasy onto them. It's understandable but dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do. I know you better than anyone, Mr. Johnson. You've always been obsessed with control because you had a chaotic childhood. Dad was never home, Mom struggled with depression, and we practically raised ourselves. You've built this meticulous life as armor against emotional disorder." Mr. Johnson felt anger rising in his chest. "And what's your point?" "My point is that you're allowing 3 children to disrupt that armor, and it's affecting your professional judgment." "Maybe my professional judgment needs to be affected." Mr. Johnson blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "What do you mean by that?" "Maybe spending 12 years focused solely on profits and growth isn't the only way to build a legacy." "Legacy?" Mr. Johnson laughed, but without humor. "Michael, you don't have children. You won't have grandchildren to tell stories about the kind grandfather who built homes for the needy. Your legacy is the company. It's what you build and leave behind." "What if I want to build something different?" "Then you're proving my point. You're not thinking clearly." The silence that followed was tense, laden with years of sibling rivalry and unresolved resentments. Mr. Johnson had always questioned Mr. Johnson's decisions, but always subtly, politically. This was the first time he attacked directly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Johnson? That you take a vacation, go to therapy, resolve this personal issue, and in the meantime, leave the operational management to me, temporarily." "Oh." Mr. Johnson smiled, but without warmth. "Now I understand. This conversation isn't about my well-being. It's about you wanting to take control. It's about the company, Michael. It's always been about the company. For you, maybe. For me." Mr. Johnson paused, organizing his thoughts. "For me, it's starting to be about other things too." "What other things?" Before Mr. Johnson could respond, a soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Maria appeared in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable. "Doctor, sorry to interrupt, but Michael is asking if he can show you the drawing he made for you." "Not now." "Maria," Mr. Johnson said automatically, but then hesitated. Mr. Johnson was watching the interaction with calculated interest, and Mr. Johnson had a sudden understanding of what was happening. "Actually," he said, surprising himself, "you can ask him to come here?" "Michael," Mr. Johnson warned quietly, "it's just a drawing, Mr. Johnson." Michael appeared a few seconds later, carrying a sheet of paper and radiating childlike energy. He stopped abruptly upon seeing Mr. Johnson, clearly intimidated by the presence of the elegant and serious man. "You can show it, Michael," Mr. Johnson encouraged. The boy approached timidly and extended the drawing. It was an aerial view of the mansion, but this time it included the garden with the ant bridge, the porch where he drew, and small figures representing him, his siblings, their mother, and Mr. Johnson. "It's our family in your home," Michael explained softly. The words hit Mr. Johnson like a bolt of lightning. Our family. To Michael, that was already a family. Somehow, in the past few weeks, the lines between boss housekeeper, owner tenants, adult children had dissolved into something more complex and meaningful. "It's a very nice drawing," Mr. Johnson said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Mr. Johnson watched the scene with an inscrutable expression. When Michael left, he remained silent for a long moment. "You've grown attached to them," he finally said. "Maybe. This will end badly, Michael, for you and for them." "Why?" "Because you're not the father of these children. And no matter how much you play family, there will come a time when reality will impose itself. They have a mother who works for you. You have business responsibilities that require total dedication. This fantasy is unsustainable. What if I decide that my responsibilities can include other things beyond the company?" Mr. Johnson stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Then I'll have to take measures to protect the interests of the family and the shareholders." "What kind of measures?" "I've already spoken with our cousin Fernando and Uncle August. They control 25% of the shares between the two of them. Combined with my 30%, we have a majority to call an extraordinary meeting." "To remove me?" "To question your leadership capabilities. Temporarily." Mr. Johnson felt the ground open beneath his feet. Mr. Johnson had planned this carefully, building a coalition within the family, even before broaching the subject. "Would you do that?" "To save the company? Yes." "And to take over the presidency?" Mr. Johnson smiled, finally revealing his true intentions. "Someone has to take the lead when the president loses objectivity." After Mr. Johnson left, Mr. Johnson remained in the office for over an hour, processing the conversation. His brother's threats were not empty. He truly had political power within the company to create serious problems. But what troubled him more was the accusation that he was losing objectivity. Was it true? Had his recent decisions been influenced by his growing closeness to the children? Michael's drawing was still on the table. "Our family in your home." The words echoed in his mind. Mr. Johnson realized that for the first time in his adult life, he didn't know exactly what he wanted. For decades, his goals had been clear: business success, wealth accumulation, professional recognition. Now other variables had entered the equation, variables that were 7 years old and called him doctor with genuine admiration in their eyes, variables that were beginning. May arrived with an unusual chill for Chicago, and Mr. Johnson discovered that there was something deeply comforting about coming home to find lights on, voices coming from the kitchen, and life pulsing through the hallways that had echoed only with his solitary footsteps for so long. The threat of Roberto lingered like a dark cloud in his mind, but he had decided not to let the fear of a corporate struggle interfere with the changes happening in his personal life. That Friday afternoon, he arrived earlier than usual, carrying a bag from Barnes & Noble that he had visited during his lunch break. Inside were 3 carefully selected books: a world atlas for Peter, who had shown a growing curiosity about different countries while flipping through architecture magazines; a technical drawing book for Michael with basic perspective exercises; and a collection of logic puzzles for John. "Mr. Johnson is home early today," Peter shouted from the garden, where he was trying to teach Michael how to play soccer, while John sat reading under the apple tree. "Peter, don't shout at Mr. Johnson." Maria appeared from the laundry room, carrying a basket of clean clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a simple blue blouse that accentuated her brown eyes. Mr. Johnson noticed, not for the first time, how different she looked when relaxed, younger, more radiant. "It's no problem," Mr. Johnson said, loosening his tie. "Actually, I brought some things for them." Maria paused, her expression shifting to something between gratitude and concern. "Mr. Johnson, you didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." The difference between the 2 words hung in the air. Over the past few weeks, many of Mr. Johnson's actions had shifted from having to wanting to, and both were noticing the transformation. The boys received the gifts with an enthusiasm that made Mr. Johnson remember why he had enjoyed giving them. Peter opened the atlas to the first page and immediately began asking questions about countries he didn't even know existed. Michael studied the technical drawing book with the seriousness of a scholar examining an ancient manuscript. John flipped through the logic book with his eyes shining with anticipation. "Mom, look at this." Michael showed a page with perspective diagrams. "It's exactly how I try to draw, only it has rules." "Rules?" Mr. Johnson asked, intrigued. "Yeah, like how to make the lines so things look far away or close. I was kind of feeling it out. But here's the right way." "Do you want me to explain some basic techniques?" Michael's face lit up. "Can you really?" Maria watched the interaction with a complex expression that Mr. Johnson was learning to recognize, a mix of gratitude, affection, and something deeper that he couldn't fully identify. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "can I talk to you for a moment? In the kitchen?" Mr. Johnson followed her, leaving the boys absorbed in their new books. In the kitchen, Maria leaned against the granite countertop, clearly struggling to find the right words. "You've been very generous with the children," she began. "More than generous. You've been paternal." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "And is that a problem?" "It's just—" Maria took a deep breath. "They are getting attached to you. A lot. Peter talks all the time about the things you build together. Michael wants to show all his drawings to you first, even before showing them to me. And John—" She paused. "John told his teacher that you're like a father to him." The impact of those words hit Mr. Johnson in the chest. "He said that?" "He did. And the teacher called me in because she thought it was strange. She asked if I had a new boyfriend living at home." Mr. Johnson felt a wave of heat rise up his neck. What did you say? The truth, that I live in my boss's house with my children. But Mr. Johnson, Maria looked him directly in the eye. I need to know what your intention is with all this. My intention. You are a rich, powerful, successful man. We are just simple people working for you. I can't allow my children to develop expectations that... That what? That can't be fulfilled. Her voice came out stronger. They are children. They don't understand social differences, the complexities of the situation. To them, you are becoming a father figure. But I am an adult, and I know this may not last forever. Mr. Johnson fell silent for a moment, processing her words. Do you think I'm playing house? I think you're a good man discovering a part of yourself that you didn't know. But I also know that lives like ours can be discarded when they cease to be convenient. Maria's brutal frankness hit him like a punch. Do you think I would do that? That I would develop a relationship with your children only to simply discard them? I don't know, Mr. Johnson. That's why I'm asking. Mr. Johnson stepped closer to the countertop, resting his hands on the cold granite surface. Maria, can I ask you a personal question? Sure. When their father left, how did you explain it to them? Maria's face tightened slightly. I told them that Daddy had left and wasn't coming back, that sometimes adults make decisions that children can't understand. And did they ask why? They did. For months, John especially. He wanted to understand what he had done wrong for his father, not to want to stay with them. How old were they? 5 years old. Mr. Johnson felt a physical ache in his chest, imagining those 3 little boys trying to understand why their father had simply left. Maria, he said carefully, I am not their father. I will never be. But I also am not the kind of person who enters the lives of children only to leave without explanation. So what? What are you to them? The question caught him off guard. What was he to them? To her? I don't know exactly, he admitted, but I know I don't want to hurt them, and I know that they have changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Maria studied him for a long moment. Do you understand that this scares a single mother? I understand. Because if you decide you don't want this in your life anymore, I won't just lose my job. I will have to explain to 3 children why another important man in their lives decided they weren't worth keeping. The word another echoed with particular force. Mr. Johnson realized that, from Maria's perspective, he was potentially repeating the pattern of abandonment that the children's father had established. What if I told you I don't intend to go anywhere? I would say you can't guarantee that. Life happens, situations change. You might meet someone, get married, want to start your own family. You might decide that 3 kids and a housekeeper are too much complication. What if I say that you are not just a housekeeper? The silence that followed was charged with tension. Maria looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Mr. Johnson, don't complicate things. What things? You know what things. Mr. Johnson did know. In recent weeks, his perception of Maria had changed drastically. She was no longer just the efficient and discreet employee. She was an intelligent, strong, caring woman, a devoted mother who had sacrificed much to provide stability for her children, a person who, when relaxed, had a contagious laugh and a worldview that challenged and inspired him. Maria. No. She raised her hand, stopping him. Don't complicate things more than they already are. Please. At that moment, Peter appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying the atlas and wearing an expression of pure excitement. Mr. Johnson, Mom, look at this. The book has a map, showing how people build different houses in each country. I mean, in Japan, they make houses that sway during an earthquake but don't fall. Is that really possible? Mr. Johnson smiled, grateful for the interruption that broke the tension of the moment. It is possible. It's called earthquake-resistant architecture. Anti-what? Earthquake-resistant. Against earthquakes. Peter opened the atlas to the corresponding page. Can you explain how it works? Mr. Johnson looked at Maria, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They would continue the conversation later. For now, there was a 7-year-old boy waiting to learn about Japanese engineering. But as he explained the principles of earthquake-resistant construction to Peter, Mr. Johnson couldn't shake off Maria's words. Another important man in their lives decided they weren't worth keeping. The responsibility of what was happening was finally becoming clear to him. It wasn't just about his own journey of self-discovery. 3 children had placed their emotional trust in his hands, and a woman was risking her children's hearts by allowing him to become part of their lives. It was a responsibility greater than any business he had ever managed, and for the first time Mr. Johnson wondered if he was prepared to fully embrace it. The call came on a rainy Monday in June, when the boys were at school and Maria was organizing the library. Mr. Johnson answered without looking at the caller ID, expecting it to be about some company project. Mr. Johnson, this is Dr. Helena Martinelli from St. Jude Children's Hospital. Are you responsible for minor Michael Santos? Mr. Johnson's blood ran cold. Not exactly. Why? What happened? The minor was admitted here half an hour ago with a respiratory crisis. His mother informed us that you would be the person to contact in case of emergency. I'm on my way. Mr. Johnson hung up and shouted for Maria, who came running down from upstairs, her eyes wide with panic at the sight of his expression. What is it? What happened? Michael is at the hospital. Respiratory crisis. Let's go. The drive to St. Jude had never felt so long. Maria was in the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she tried to call the school to let them know she would pick up John and Peter later. How did I not notice? She murmured. He was fine this morning. He had coffee, played with his brothers. It's not your fault, Mr. Johnson said, overtaking a bus in a maneuver he normally would never make. Michael has always been more fragile than the other 2. He was born a little underweight, took longer to speak, but he's never had respiratory problems. At the hospital, they were directed to the pediatric ICU. Dr. Martinelli, a woman in her 40s with grey hair tied in a bun, greeted them with a serious yet reassuring expression. Michael is stable now, she said immediately, seeing the despair on their faces. But we need to talk. They sat in a private room, and Mr. Johnson noticed that automatically Maria had positioned herself slightly behind him, as if he were truly responsible for the child. She had listed his name as the emergency contact. Michael has asthma, Dr. Martinelli explained, a moderate to severe form that apparently was not diagnosed before. Today's crisis was triggered by a combination of factors: the cold weather, high humidity, and possibly some allergen in the school environment. Asthma can be controlled, right? Mr. Johnson asked. It can and should be, but it requires ongoing medication, regular medical follow-up, and some lifestyle changes. The question is... She hesitated. The proper treatment is expensive. We're talking about imported medications, specialized consultations, possibly some more sophisticated tests. Maria paled. How expensive? Well, the main medication costs around $800 a month, plus the consultations, which are $300 each, and should be monthly at first. Mr. Johnson saw Maria doing quick calculations in her head. He knew her salary was $2,500 a month. Michael's treatment would cost more than a third of her income. And if we don't do the treatment? Maria asked. In a low voice, Mr. Johnson said, the crises will repeat. They may worsen. In severe cases, uncontrolled asthma can be fatal. The silence that followed was heavy with weight. Mr. Johnson looked at Maria, seeing the despair and determination battling in her expression. She was clearly calculating how she would get the money. Over time, perhaps a second job, sacrifices that would further compromise her quality of life. "Doctor," Mr. Johnson interrupted, "are all these treatments covered by health insurance?" "Yes, most of them are." "Why?" "Because Michael will have the best health insurance available." Maria turned to him, surprised. "Doctor, I can't accept. It's not being offered, it's being decided." His voice came out firmer than he intended. "Dr. Martinelli, run all the necessary tests, prescribe all the medications. You can send everything to my secretary." "Mr. Johnson, please," Maria whispered. "Maria, not now. Right now, the priority is Michael." 2 hours later, they were in Michael's room in the pediatric ward. The boy was awake, with an oxygen mask covering half of his small face, but his eyes sparkled upon seeing them. "Mom! Doctor!" His voice came out muffled by the mask. "Look at me! I'm just like an astronaut!" Maria approached the bed, holding Michael's small hand. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better. The doctor said my lung got lazy, but it will be okay again." Mr. Johnson positioned himself on the other side of the bed. "And what else did the doctor say?" "That now I have to use a special medicine every day, and that I can't run as fast as Peter anymore." Michael made a face. "But she said I can keep drawing as much as I want." "That's the most important thing," Mr. Johnson agreed. That night, after leaving Michael admitted for observation, Mr. Johnson and Maria returned to the mansion in silence. The other, 2 boys, were still at Mrs. Smith's house, who had offered to pick them up from school when she heard what had happened. In the living room, Maria finally broke the silence. "Doctor, I need to talk about what happened today. If it's about the money, it's about much more than money." She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands intertwined in her lap. "Did you notice that I put your name as an emergency contact?" Mr. Johnson nodded. "I did that because in the last few weeks, you have become the most stable person in their lives. More stable than I am in many ways. Maria, let me finish, please." She took a deep breath. "Today, when Michael had the crisis, my first reaction was to call you, not my sister, not any friend, you, because I knew you would handle everything. And I did. You did. You paid for a treatment that costs more than my salary without blinking. You made decisions about my son as if—" She paused. "As if what? As if he were your son too." The words hung in the air between them. Mr. Johnson realized that this was exactly how he had felt in the hospital, as if Michael were his responsibility, his son in danger. "And does that bother you?" "It scares me," she admitted, "because today I realize that they are no longer just my children. In their minds, in practical decisions, you are also responsible for them. Is that a problem?" Maria was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with complex emotions. "Doctor, can I ask you something very personal?" "You can." "What do you feel for us? For me and the boys?" The question hit Mr. Johnson hard. For weeks he had avoided asking himself exactly that same question. "I feel that you—" He searched for the right words. "I feel that you have turned this house into a home. You have turned my life into a life. I feel that when I think about the future, I can no longer imagine it without you." "That's very beautiful, Doctor, but it doesn't answer my question." Mr. Johnson looked her directly in the eye. "I love those boys as if they were my own. And you—" He hesitated. "And me? You have become much more than an employee to me, Maria, much more." She closed her eyes if the words caused physical pain. "I knew it. And is that a problem?" "It's complicated." "Why?" Because I also... She stopped, started again. Because it's not just a one-way street. What is happening here? Mr. Johnson's heart raced. What do you mean? I mean that I am also getting attached. Gradually, without realizing it. Seeing you with my children, the patience you have with them, the way you truly listen to them. It's hard not to get attached. So, what's the problem? Maria opened her eyes, and he saw tears forming. The problem is that I am a housekeeper, a single mother with an incomplete high school education, and you are a millionaire businessman with an MBA and a mansion in the gardens. And so these differences don't just disappear because we are getting attached to each other. Mr. Johnson stood up from the sofa, moving closer to her. Maria, do you think these differences matter to me? I don't know. Maybe not now. But they will matter when the novelty wears off, when you realize that you are living with a woman who barely finished high school. Do you really think that's what matters to me, in a person? I don't know what matters to you in a person. That's the problem. Mr. Johnson knelt in front of her, taking her hands. Maria, look at me. She raised her eyes, reluctant. In the last few weeks, you have taught me more about what really matters in life than all the business books I have ever read. You taught me that a house is only a home when it has love inside it. You taught me that success without people to share it with is worth nothing. Doctor, let me finish. You taught me that there are different types of intelligence, and that yours, the emotional intelligence, the practical wisdom, the ability to love unconditionally, means so much more. What any diploma... Maria was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't get attached to you despite our differences. I got attached because of who you are. And who am I? You are the strongest and bravest woman I know. You are the mother I wish I had. You are the person who makes me want to be a better man, Maria sobbed, covering her face with her hands. And if I tell you that I want this to be real, not temporary, not while the novelty lasts, real and permanent. I would say you are speaking out of emotional impulse after a hard day. And what if I say I've been thinking about this for weeks? I would say that changes everything, and that everything changing terrifies me. Mr. Johnson took her hands, pulling them away from her face. Maria, look at me. She stared at him, her eyes red but determined. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you. I'm not going to decide one day that this was a mistake. I can promise that. No one can promise that. I can, and I'm promising. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was charged with possibility, fear, and hope. And now, Maria finally asked, now we're going to get your other two children and explain that Michael will be okay, and tomorrow we will start figuring out how to make this work. And if it doesn't work? Mr. Johnson smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. Then at least we will have tried. July arrived with a typical chill of Chicago's winter, and the routine of the home had settled into a harmony that Mr. Johnson had never imagined possible. Michael had returned from the hospital with an arsenal of medications and a nebulizer that turned his inhalation sessions into space adventures. He insisted he was preparing to be an astronaut. John continued his late nights in the library, now officially allowed to use any book he wanted. Peter had convinced Mr. Johnson to start building a treehouse, a project that consumed his weekends with a joy he hadn't felt since childhood. It was on a Thursday, July 22nd, that Mr. Johnson's world collapsed. He was in a meeting with architects discussing the project of Villa Maddalena, now renamed Integrated Housing Complex Villa Maddalena, including affordable apartments, community spaces, and a daycare. when his secretary, Patricia, appeared at the conference room door with a look of panic he had never seen. "Mr. Johnson, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." "Patricia, we are in a meeting." "It's about your brother and a court injunction." The silence in the room was absolute. Mr. Johnson had known Patricia for 8 years and had never seen her interrupt a meeting unless it was a matter of life or death. "Excuse me, please," he said to the architects, who quickly exited. "What happened?" Patricia closed the door and handed him an official envelope. "It arrived half an hour ago by courier. It's an injunction determining your temporary removal from the presidency of the company." Mr. Johnson opened the envelope, quickly reading the legal document. The words seemed to dance on the page. Temporary incapacity to perform executive functions, harmful decisions to the interests of the company, erratic behavior, and unfounded decisions not based on technical analyses. "Robert did it," he murmured. "Sir, my brother, he managed to get me removed from the presidency." The phone on the desk rang. Patricia answered, spoke a few words softly, then covered the mouthpiece. "It's Dr. Robert. He says he needs to speak with you urgently." Mr. Johnson picked up the phone. "Hello, Robert." "Ricardo, I hope you don't take this personally. It was a business decision." "Of course it was." Mr. Johnson's voice came out cold. "And I imagine you have already called a board meeting to temporarily assume the presidency. This afternoon at 4 o'clock. Ricardo, you know I have always respected your ability. But what? But your recent decisions have left everyone worried. The Villa Maddalena project with reduced margins, the changes in the profile of the developments, your personal situation. The shareholders have lost confidence." "My personal situation? You know what I'm talking about." "No, Robert. Explain it to me." The silence on the other end was long. "The housekeeper and the children, Ricardo. You are living with them as if you were a family. That raises questions about your judgment." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you are capable of maintaining the objectivity necessary to run a company of this size." Mr. Johnson hung up without saying goodbye. Patricia watched him with concern. "Doctor, what are you going to do?" "First, I'm going home. Then I will figure it out." The drive to the mansion never felt so short. Mr. Johnson needed time to process what had happened, to plan his response, but before he knew it, he was already parking in the garage. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner, wearing a floral apron she had bought the previous month, a small personal joy that represented how much more comfortable she was feeling in the home. Upon seeing him arrive early with a grim expression, she immediately turned off the stove. "What happened?" Mr. Johnson showed her the injunction. Maria read it slowly, frowning at the more technical parts. "Can they do this?" "They can, and they did. Because of us." The direct question hit him hard. "It's not your fault, Maria." "But it is because of us." Mr. Johnson didn't respond, which was answer enough. Maria sat down on one of the chairs at the kitchen island, her hands trembling slightly. "I knew this would happen." "Maria." "No, I knew. Since that conversation with your brother, I knew he wouldn't accept the situation. Robert is ambitious and calculating. He would use any excuse to try to take over the presidency. But we gave him the perfect excuse." The weight of Maria's words echoed in the silent kitchen. As much as Mr. Johnson wanted to deny it, there was truth in them. His recent business decisions had been influenced by his new perspective on life. The project of the integrated housing complex, with its emphasis on social responsibility, really reduced the profit margin. And yes, he was dedicating less time to business because he was investing time in other things, other people. "And now," Maria asked, "now I fight. I hire the best lawyers, contest the injunction, prove that my decisions were sound and beneficial for the company in the long run." "And how long does that take?" "Months, maybe years." Maria nodded slowly, as if she were coming to a conclusion he still couldn't see. And during those months, years, you will be unemployed. I will be fighting to get my company back, without a salary. I have enough savings to support a house this size, 3 kids, expensive medical treatment for one of them, and still pay for very expensive lawyers? Mr. Johnson stopped. He hadn't thought about the practical math of the situation. His personal savings were substantial, but not infinite. A prolonged legal battle, combined with the costs of maintaining the current standard of living, could indeed create financial problems. I can see the bills in your head, Maria said softly, and you're realizing that the situation is more complicated than you thought. I'll figure something out. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out. Maria stood up, moving closer to him. Doctor, Mr. Johnson, I need to tell you something. The use of his first name surprised him. In recent weeks, she had started using it occasionally when they were alone, but always hesitantly. Go ahead. If the situation is like this, if your family is using our presence here as a weapon against you, maybe it would be better for us to leave. What? I can look for another job, take the boys somewhere else, leave you free to fight for the company without this complication. Maria, no. Mr. Johnson, be practical. If I'm not here, your brother loses his main argument. You go back to being the focused, objective businessman you always were. And I go back to being miserable alone in this house. But you get your company back. And what good is that? What good is having the company if I don't have you? Maria looked at him with a mix of love and exasperation. What good is having us if you lose everything you've built in 20 years? Maria, listen. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of voices coming from the garden. John and Peter had returned from school and were discussing something about the treehouse. Michael was with them, carrying his drawing portfolio. Mom, Doctor! Peter shouted, entering through the kitchen door. The teacher said our treehouse can enter the school science fair. We can present it as an engineering project. Mr. Johnson forced a smile. Really? That's great news. John, always observant, immediately noticed that something was wrong. Did something happen? Why do you ask that? Because you two look like you've been arguing, and because there's lawyer paper on the table. John's insight never ceased to amaze Mr. Johnson. How do you know it's lawyer paper? Because it has the letterhead of a law firm, and because my mom has the same look she had when the landlord wanted to evict us from our old apartment. The silence that followed was heavy. Michael approached Mr. Johnson, tugging at his dress pants. Doctor, did someone do something bad to you? No, Michael, it's just complicated work. Are we going to have to leave here? The question came from the child with devastating naturalness. For Michael, drastic and unexpected changes were already part of life experience. First, the father left, then the apartment changed, now maybe another move. No, Mr. Johnson said firmly, no one is leaving here. Promise. Mr. Johnson looked at Maria, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. I promise, he said, knowing he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. But at that moment, looking at the 3 kids who had placed their trust in him, Mr. Johnson made a decision. He would not just fight to get the company back. He would fight to keep his family together, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had built before. The months of August and September passed in a blur of meetings with lawyers, court hearings, and rising tensions. Mr. Johnson had hired the best corporate law firm in Chicago, but each week it became clearer that Robert had meticulously prepared his move. Documents were presented showing that the company's profits had decreased since Mr. Johnson began implementing projects with a social focus. Witnesses, employees Mr. Johnson considered loyal, testified about his behavioral changes and questionable decisions. Mr. Johnson's personal bank account visibly decreased each month. The legal fees were astronomical, and maintaining the mansion, Michael's treatments, and still supporting the family consumed his savings more quickly than he had anticipated. But he refused to cut spending on the kids or consider Maria's suggestion that they look for another place to live. It was on a cold Monday afternoon that everything changed definitively. Mr. Johnson was in the Home Office reviewing proposals for out-of-court settlements, all involving his definitive resignation from the presidency in exchange for financial compensation, when Maria appeared at the door with an expression he had learned to fear. "I need to talk to you," she said, closing the door behind her. "If it's about money, I've already said we'll figure something out." "It's not about money, it's about the kids." Mr. Johnson raised his eyes from the documents. "What about the kids?" Maria sat in the chair in front of the desk, taking a deep breath as if preparing to dive into deep waters. "John had an anxiety attack at school today." "What do you mean, anxiety attack?" "He started crying out of nowhere during class. He told the teacher he was afraid you would leave like his father did. The school counselor called me to talk." Mr. Johnson's fist clenched around the documents. "And what did the counselor say?" "The children are sensing the tension at home. Even when we try to hide it, they can feel when adults are worried. And—" Maria hesitated. "And what?" "And maybe they are developing abandonment anxiety because they have been through this before." The words hit Mr. Johnson like a punch to the stomach. "Do they think I'm going to abandon them?" "John thinks so. And if John thinks it, Peter and Michael are probably thinking the same." Mr. Johnson stood up from his chair, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. Outside, he could see the half-built treehouse, a project that had stalled when the legal battle intensified and consumed all his weekends. "What else did the counselor say?" "She said that children need stability, and when the adults around them are in constant conflict, they start to feel responsible for the problem." "They feel responsible." "John asked if it was his fault for asking you to teach him architecture. Peter wants to know if it was because he called you almost dad at school." "Michael—" Maria paused, her voice choked. "Michael what?" "Michael stopped drawing, completely. He hasn't picked up a pencil in a week." The impact of this information was greater than any court injunction. Michael, who had drawn compulsively since he could hold a pencil, had stopped. It was as if an essential part of who he was had simply shut down. "Mr. Johnson," Maria continued, "I know you're struggling to hold all of this together. I know you love us and want to protect our family. But maybe loving means letting go." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you should accept one of the settlements the lawyers proposed. Take the compensation money, start a new business, and stop destroying yourself trying to recover something that might already be lost." Mr. Johnson turned to face her. "And you? What happens to you if I accept the settlement?" "We'll manage. We always manage." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Maria sighed. "Mr. Johnson, look at yourself. When was the last time you slept through the night? When was the last time you played with the children without thinking about meetings and paperwork?" She was right. In recent weeks, Mr. Johnson had become a shadow of himself, constantly worried, irritable, absent even when present. "They need you whole," Maria continued, "not you divided between them and a war that you might not win. And if I don't accept the settlement, what? If I keep fighting? Then there will come a point where you won't have any money left to pay the lawyers, nor to maintain this house, nor for Michael's treatment. And then we'll have to leave anyway. Only you will have lost everything in the process." Her logic was relentless. Mr. Johnson had done the same calculations several times, always arriving at the same devastating conclusion. "Maria," he finally said, "if I accept the settlement, if I give up the company, would you still be with me, even if I'm no longer the successful businessman you knew?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria studied him for a long moment before answering. "Mr. Johnson, do you think I fell in love with your money?" "I don't know. Maybe for the security it represented." "Then you don't know me as well as you thought." Her voice came out firmer. "I fell in love with the man who teaches architecture to my son at 5 in the morning. The man who builds ant bridges with Peter. The man who spent the whole night at the hospital when Michael had a respiratory crisis. And if that man comes without the mansion, without the imported car, without being able to pay for private school for the kids, then we'll live in a smaller apartment and they will go to public school, and we will continue to be a family." Her words lifted a weight that Mr. Johnson didn't even know he was carrying. For months, he had assumed that losing the company meant losing the family he had found. "There's a settlement proposal that includes compensation of $8 million, he said. "Is that enough to start over?" "More than enough. You could buy an apartment, set up a small consulting office, ensure education and health care for the kids. And would you be happy doing that?" Mr. Johnson considered the question. For 20 years, his identity had been inseparable from the company. He was Mr. Johnson, president of Johnson Construction. Without the company, who would he be? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I would be happier than being a successful businessman alone." "Then you already know what you have to do." That night, Mr. Johnson gathered the children in the living room. They sat on the large sofa, Maria beside him, and the triplets formed a semicircle on the rug, as they always did when there were important conversations. "I have some news to share with you," he began. "Bad or good?" Peter asked directly. "A bit of both." John frowned. "Are you going to have to leave?" "No, we are the ones who will have to leave this house." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael, who had been apathetic in recent weeks, looked up for the first time. "Where to?" "To a smaller apartment, simpler, but where we will continue living together." "Like a real family?" Peter asked. "Yes, like a real family." John stood up and approached. "Mr. Johnson, and you're not going to work at that big company anymore?" "No, I'm going to work on smaller projects, maybe even projects that help people like you and your mother have better homes." "Like a superhero architect?" Michael asked, a spark of interest returning to his eyes. Mr. Johnson smiled. "Exactly like a superhero architect." Michael stood up too, taking Mr. Johnson's hand. "Can I design your new office?" "You can. In fact, I was counting on that." That night, for the first time in months, Mr. Johnson slept soundly. The next day Mr. Johnson called his lawyers and accepted the settlement. The war was over. Real life was about to begin. December arrived with the typical heat of a Chicago summer and the hustle of moving. The apartment that Mr. Johnson had purchased was in the integrated housing complex, ironically in the same neighborhood where he had planned the housing project that had caused so much controversy. It was 150 square meters on the 8th floor of a modern building. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a gourmet balcony with a sunset view. Compared to the mansion in the affluent neighborhood, it was tiny. For the children, it was a castle. "Mom, look! From my window you can see the Ferris wheel in the park!" Peter shouted from the room he would share with Michael. "And from ours, you can see the tallest building in Chicago," Michael added, his excitement evident. He had returned to drawing the previous week, creating detailed floor plans of the new apartment and even suggestions for decoration. John had chosen the smallest room, but it had the best natural light. "It's perfect for reading," he explained to Mr. Johnson, "and it's close to your office." Mr. Johnson had converted one of the rooms into an office from where he managed his new company, Johnson Social Projects. The irony was not lost on him. The project that Robert had used to challenge him was now the foundation of his new business. In the last 2 months, he had secured 3 contracts to develop affordable housing and community spaces, working with NGOs and housing cooperatives. Mr. Johnson, Maria corrected herself, appearing at the office door with 2 cups of coffee. She was still struggling to adjust to the changes in their dynamic. Officially, she was no longer a housekeeper. Mr. Johnson had insisted she enroll in a management course at night while taking care of the organization of the home and helping with the administrative side of the new company during the day. "I still can't get used to you calling me doctor," he said, accepting the coffee, "and I still can't get used to not being a housekeeper." She sat in the chair in front of the desk. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role." "What role?" "The boss's girlfriend who got a social promotion." Mr. Johnson stopped stirring his coffee, looking at her seriously. "Is that how you see yourself?" Maria sighed. "I don't know how I see myself. 6 months ago, I was a housekeeper. Today I'm living with you as... what exactly?" It was a question that had been bothering both of them in recent weeks. During the turbulence of the legal battle, they had supported each other, united against external adversities. Now, in a more stable situation, questions about the future of their relationship had become more pressing. "As whatever you want to be," Mr. Johnson replied, "as whatever we both want to be." "And what do we want to be?" Before Mr. Johnson could answer, John appeared at the office door. "Sorry to interrupt," he said formally, "but there's a visitor for Mr. Johnson." "Visitor? Who?" "A man in a suit. He said he's your brother." Mr. Johnson and Maria exchanged glances. Robert had not attempted any contact since the settlement was signed 3 weeks ago. "Send him up," Mr. Johnson said. Robert came up accompanied by the doorman, clearly impressed by the difference between the mansion in the affluent neighborhood and the apartment in the integrated housing complex. He wore an even more expensive suit than usual and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than the monthly salary of most people. "Interesting apartment," was his comment upon entering. "More cozy than the mansion." "What do you want, Robert?" "I came to talk about business." "What business?" "You took over the company. I'm moving on with my life. We have no more business together." Robert sat down uninvited, placing the briefcase on the coffee table. "Actually, we do. The project in the integrated housing complex that you were developing is running into problems." "What kind of problems?" "The local community is rejecting the current proposal. They want the original project, with affordable housing and community spaces. Investors are threatening to withdraw if we can't get approval from the city." Mr. Johnson leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "And you are still the only one who understands the needs of the community. Your research, your contacts with local leaders, we need that. You removed me from the company because my ideas were emotional and detrimental to the business. Now you want me back because those same ideas are necessary. The circumstances have changed. My answer hasn't changed. I'm not interested in working for you." Robert opened the briefcase, pulling out a document. "What if it's not working for me? What if it's working with me?" "What are you talking about?" "I'm proposing a partnership. Your new company would be responsible for all the social aspects of Johnson Construction Company's projects: affordable housing, community development, relationships with NGOs. We would leave that area completely under your responsibility." Mr. Johnson studied his brother, looking for the trick. "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for making our ventures viable in the eyes of the community and public agencies. Mr. Johnson, the market has changed. Social responsibility is no longer an option. It's a necessity. Projects without community approval cannot get licensed. And you think I would agree to work with the person who removed me from the presidency of the company? I think you would agree to work to support your new family." The phrase dropped like a bomb in the room. Robert had aimed exactly where he knew it would hurt. "I'm offering a consulting contract of $50,000 a month," Robert continued, "plus a share of the profits from the social projects. It's a serious proposal, Mr. Johnson." Maria, who had remained silent, stood up. "Excuse me, I'm going to check on the kids." When she left, Robert smiled. "She knows you need the money. We don't need your charity, Robert. It's not charity, it's business. You have something I need. I have something you need. It's a fair trade." Mr. Johnson walked to the window, watching the children playing in the common area of the building. Peter was teaching other kids how to build something with sticks and stones. Michael was drawing. Seated at a table, surrounded by curious little friends, John was reading a book in the shade, but occasionally lifted his eyes to supervise the play of his siblings. "Mr. Johnson," Robert said behind him, "I know you hate me for what happened, and maybe you have a reason for that. But this is bigger than our personal fight." "What is?" "Dad's legacy. The company he built. If we can't adapt to the new times, we're going to lose everything, both of us." Mr. Johnson turned around. "And why should I care? You made it clear that I wasn't fit to run the company." "You weren't fit to run a traditional construction company, but maybe you're exactly the right person to lead a social urban development firm." "Social urban development?" Robert stood up, moving closer to the window. "That's what the market wants, Mr. Johnson. Projects that transform communities, that create social value beyond the economic. You were right about that. You were just in the wrong company to implement it. And now you want to create the right company? I want to create a partnership that allows both of us to do what we do best. I handle the financial and operational side. You handle the human and social aspects." Mr. Johnson was silent for a long moment, watching the children. Below, Peter had managed to get a group of 10 kids engaged in building some kind of makeshift fort. Michael was showing his drawings to the new friends, clearly explaining some architectural concept. John had closed the book and was now mediating a discussion about the rules of some game. $50,000 a month, he asked, plus profit sharing. And I would have total autonomy in the social aspects of the projects. Absolutely. Hiring staff, methodology, community relations. I wouldn't interfere. I need to talk to Maria. Of course. But Mr. Johnson, the proposal has a deadline. The integrated housing complex project needs a response by the end of the year. If we can't make it happen, we're going to lose $50 million in investments. After Robert left, Mr. Johnson was alone in the office for almost an hour, processing the conversation. The proposal was tempting, not only financially, but professionally. It would be a chance to implement his ideas about urban development on a much larger scale than he could achieve alone. On the other hand, it meant going back to work with Robert, the man who had orchestrated his exit from the company. Maria appeared at the door with a glass of orange juice. "The kids are asking if you're going to come down to play with them." "In a bit." "Maria, I need your opinion on Robert's proposal." She sat down, leaning slightly forward. "My opinion is that you already know what you want to do." "Do I? And what do I want to do?" "Accept it, because it's a good professional proposal, because the money will provide security for the kids, and because deep down you miss working on big projects." "And do you think it's a good idea for me to work with my brother?" "Again, I think it's a good idea for you to do what makes you happy professionally, and I think building homes for people in need makes you happier than anything else." Mr. Johnson smiled. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been. You just took a while to realize." That night, during dinner in the new apartment, Mr. Johnson announced his decision to the kids. "I'm going to go back to work with my brother," he said, "but this time doing projects that help families like ours have better homes." "Are you going to build houses for poor people?" Peter asked. "I'm going to help build entire neighborhoods for people who need decent housing." Michael looked up from his plate. "Can I help with the drawings?" "I can count on that." John, always practical, asked the important question. "And are we going to keep living here?" "We're going to keep living here. All together." "Forever?" Michael insisted. Mr. Johnson looked at Maria, who smiled and nodded almost imperceptibly. "Forever," he confirmed. And for the first time since he had lost the presidency of the company, Mr. Johnson felt completely at peace with his choices. 15 months after the first pasta lunch that changed everything, Mr. Johnson woke up to the familiar sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a Saturday in January, and the apartment in the integrated housing complex buzzed with the energy of a family that had found its natural rhythm. He stretched in bed, watching Maria still asleep beside him, her hair spread across the pillow like a golden frame around her serene face. In the last 6 months, a lot had changed. The partnership with Robert had proven to be more successful than either of them had imagined. The integrated housing complex project had become a model for sustainable urban development, winning awards for social architecture and attracting investors interested in social responsibility. Johnson's social projects had grown from a one-person company to a team of 12 professionals, including architects, social workers, and engineers specialized in affordable housing. But the most significant change had happened 3 months ago, on a rainy October afternoon. Maria had come home from her administration course with a strange expression, nervous and radiant at the same time. "I need to talk to you," she had said, using the same tone she had used that night in the hospital when Michael had his respiratory crisis. Mr. Johnson had feared the worst, some health issue, some family complication. Instead, Maria had handed him an official paper from the college. "I passed the entrance exam," she had announced, her eyes shining with pride. "Architecture and urbanism, evening classes. I start in February." The joy Mr. Johnson felt at that moment was greater than any business victory. Maria had decided to pursue a career in social housing, inspired by the projects they were developing together. "I want to understand the technical side," she had explained. "I want to be able to contribute meaningfully, not just in the administrative organization." Now, 5 months later, she was in her 3rd semester, standing out as one of the best students in her class. Her practical experiences with low-income families gave a unique perspective on academic projects, and more than one teacher had commented on the humanized vision she brought to architecture. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Maria murmured, opening her eyes and smiling at him. "Good morning, future architect." She laughed, stretching. "There's still 4 years until that. But you will make it. With 3 kids, a job, and a husband, it will be a miracle." The word husband still sounded new between them. They had married in a simple civil ceremony 2 months ago, with only the children as witnesses. No big party or exotic honeymoon. Mr. Johnson had learned that the most important moments in life were the simplest. "Speaking of which," Maria got up, putting on her robe, "the boys are making some suspicious noise in the kitchen. I think we better check before they destroy the apartment." They found the triplets, now 8.5 years old, engaged in an elaborate experimental cooking session. Peter was trying to make pancakes shaped like buildings, using geometric molds he had seen in Mr. Johnson's designs. Michael was drawing floor plans of apartments on the parchment paper that was supposed to be used to line the molds. John was reading aloud a recipe from a French cookbook he had borrowed from the building's library. "What are you guys up to?" Mr. Johnson asked, trying to hide his smile. "We're making architectural breakfast," Peter announced proudly. "Look, I made a pancake that looks like the Copacabana Palace. And I designed what a perfect apartment for a family of 5 would look like," Michael added, showing his drawing. "With a big library for John, a studio for me, a construction workshop for Peter, an office for you, and a study room for Mother." Mr. Johnson studied the drawing, impressed with Michael's technical evolution. The boy had developed an instinctive understanding of proportions and functionality that impressed even the architects at the firm. "Michael," Mr. Johnson said, "have you ever thought about taking the children's technical drawing course that the university offers on Saturdays?" Michael's eyes lit up. "Can I really? We can talk about it." John closed the cookbook, looking seriously at Mr. Johnson. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "How do we know if a family is working out?" The question caught Mr. Johnson off guard. "What do you mean?" "It's just that before, when it was just me, Peter, Michael, and Mother, we were an incomplete family. When you came, we became complete. But how do we know if it will stay that way forever?" Maria and Mr. Johnson exchanged glances. It was a profound question, laden with the experience of abandonment that the children had lived with their biological father. "John," Mr. Johnson knelt to the boy's height, "do you remember when we built that bridge for the ants in the garden of the mansion?" "I remember. And do you remember that we tested if it was sturdy before trusting that the ants could cross?" "I remember. A family is like a bridge. We build it, test it, reinforce the weak points, and over time it becomes so solid that it can bear any weight." "And is our family already solid?" Mr. Johnson looked around the kitchen. At Maria, organizing the ingredients the boys had scattered. At Peter, focused on his architectural pancakes. At Michael, absorbed in his drawings. At John, with his serious curiosity about the world. "It is," he said with certainty. "Our family has weathered storms and stood strong. That means it is solid." Peter, who had been listening to the conversation, approached with a spatula in hand. "Mr. Johnson, can I call you Dad now that you guys are married?" The question echoed in the kitchen. It was the first time one of the children had directly verbalized what everyone felt, but no one had formalized. "Would you like to call me Dad?" "I would," Peter said immediately. "Me too," Michael agreed. Everyone looked at John, always the most cautious with emotional changes. "John," Maria asked gently, "can I still call you Mr. Johnson sometimes, and Dad other times?" Mr. Johnson smiled. "You can call me whatever you want. The important thing is that you know I will always be here. Even if we mess up the house, even if you destroy the entire apartment, even if we get bad grades in school, even if you repeat a grade, even if we become teenagers and become annoying." Mr. Johnson laughed. "Especially if you become annoying teenagers. That's when you'll need me the most." John nodded, seemingly satisfied with the reassurances. "Okay then, you can be our real dad." And with that simple declaration, the transformation that had begun 15 months ago was finally complete. Later that day, Mr. Johnson found himself alone in the office, working on the design of a housing project in East Chicago. It was Saturday, but he had promised to deliver the first phase of the project by Monday. Maria was at the university, attending an extra lecture on urban sustainability. The kids were at Mrs. Smith's house, the neighbor who had become a sort of adoptive grandmother to them. The phone rang. It was Robert. "Mr. Johnson, I need to tell you some news." "What news?" "Johnson Construction Company has been selected to participate in the largest social housing project in Latin America. It will be built in the East Side, 50,000 housing units integrated with schools, health clinics and community centers." Mr. Johnson stopped drawing. 50,000 units? And they want Johnson Social Projects as the exclusive consultancy for all community development. Robert, it's the project of our dreams, Mr. Johnson. It's the chance to prove that urban development can be both social and profitable at the same time. What's the timeline? 5 years, and the budget for social consultancy is 20 million. Mr. Johnson fell silent, processing the magnitude of the project. 20 million over 5 years would mean not only complete financial stability for his family, but also the opportunity to impact the lives of 200,000 people. There's one condition, Robert continued. What? You would have to take on the coordination. It would be like being president of the company again, but of a company entirely dedicated to what you believe in. Robert, think calmly. It's a unique opportunity. After he hung up, Mr. Johnson stared out the window of the apartment. Down below, he could see children playing in the building's playground, families enjoying the weekend, life happening in a simple and genuine way. When Maria arrived from the university, she found him still in the office, thoughtfully looking at the drawings on the table. "How was the lecture?" he asked. "Inspiring. They talked about a project in Colombia where they managed to transform an entire slum into a sustainable neighborhood." "And you, how was your day?" Mr. Johnson shared about Robert's call. Maria listened in silence, sitting in the chair across from the table. "It's a great opportunity," she said when he finished. "It is, but it would also mean much more responsibility, much more work, and much less time with you all." "And what do you want to do?" Mr. Johnson smiled, remembering all the time she had asked that exact question during the decisive moments of their lives. "I want to accept, but only if you think we can keep our family together even with the changes." "Mr. Johnson," Maria stood up, approaching him. 15 months ago, you were afraid that 3 kids would destroy your organized life. Today, you're worried that a professional project might destroy your family life. And that shows how much you've changed, how much we've all changed. She kissed his forehead. "Accept the project. The kids will be proud to have a father who builds homes for those in need. And will you be proud to have a husband who's always busy? I will be proud to have a husband who uses his intelligence to do good in the world." That night, during dinner, Mr. Johnson told the kids about the project. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. 50,000 homes, Peter exclaimed. "That's an entire city." "Can I help design the parks?" Michael asked. "And will there be libraries in the new neighborhoods?" John wanted to know. "There will be everything," Mr. Johnson promised. "Schools, health clinics, parks, libraries. It will be like building a city from scratch, but thinking first of the people who will live in it." "Just like you did with us," John observed. "You took a broken family and built a whole family." John's words echoed around the dining table. That was exactly what had happened. 15 months ago, Mr. Johnson was a successful man, but emotionally empty. Maria was a single mother struggling to provide stability for her kids. The children were 3 intelligent boys, marked by paternal abandonment. Together, they had built something greater than the sum of their parts. A real family based on love, mutual respect, and genuine commitment. And now they were going to use the lessons learned in that personal construction to help other families have their own chances at happiness. "So it's decided," Mr. Johnson said, raising his glass of orange juice. "Let's build 50,000 homes for 50,000 families." "Cheers!" the kids shouted in unison, toasting with their glasses. Later, when the kids were asleep and Maria was studying for a structural engineering exam, Mr. Johnson returned to the office and picked up the drawing that Michael had made that morning. The perfect apartment for a family of 5. In the corner of the page, the boy had written in his neat handwriting, "Johnson Smith Family Home, a place where everyone loves each other forever." Mr. Johnson smiled, storing the drawing in a special folder where he kept the most important projects of his career, because some projects he had learned were not measured in square meters or market values. Some projects were measured by the amount of love built within their walls. And by that measure, his family was the most successful project he would ever undertake. Please like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched this far, comment, "I watched this far," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.